My name is Hazel Mitchell, and I'm 22 years old. When my father's ultimatum flashed across my phone screen, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. Attend my golden sister Amber's wedding or lose my college tuition, with just one semester left. The sister who stole my boyfriend. The sister who's always been the favorite. The sister who smiled when she hurt me. Now I had to choose between my self-respect and my education. Before I get into my story, let me know where you're watching from. If you're dealing with toxic family dynamics too, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how I turned this nightmare into my defining moment. Growing up in Brookline, an affluent suburb just outside Boston, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. Our colonial-style house with its manicured lawn and seasonal decorations was the envy of the neighborhood. My father, James Mitchell, built his reputation as one of Boston's most aggressive corporate attorneys, while my mother Diana maintained a successful career selling luxury real estate. We never wanted for anything, at least not materially. Amber was born 3 years before me, and from my earliest memories, she was the sun our family orbited around. She had our father's ambitious drive and our mother's social grace, a combination that made her excel at everything she touched. Her bedroom walls were covered with academic achievement awards, debate team trophies, and tennis tournament medals. Every dinner conversation inevitably turned to Amber's latest accomplishment. "Hazel, did you hear your sister got the highest score in her class on the calculus exam?" Dad would announce, beaming with pride. "That's why colleges like Yale take notice." I'd nod and push food around my plate, my own solid B+ in English that day completely forgotten. When Amber was accepted to 3 Ivy League schools, Dad took the entire extended family out to celebrate at Boston's most expensive restaurant. When I made honor roll that same week, Mom patted my shoulder and said, "That's nice, honey," before returning to Amber's college decision discussion. The pattern was consistent throughout our childhood. If we both participated in an activity, Amber received intensive coaching and support. I got what time and energy remained, which wasn't much. When Amber needed a new tennis racket, she got the professional model. When I needed equipment for the photography club, Dad questioned whether it was really necessary and reminded me how expensive my sister's college prep courses were. "We have limited resources, Hazel," he'd say, despite his 6-figure salary and annual bonuses. "Your sister is on a trajectory for greatness. We need to support that." Mom occasionally attempted to balance the scales but never strongly enough to change anything. She'd slip me extra allowance money or take me shopping alone sometimes, but she never directly challenged Dad's obvious favoritism. In our household, keeping the peace meant keeping Dad happy, and what made Dad happy was Amber's success. By middle school, I'd internalized the message that I would never measure up. I stopped trying to compete with Amber directly, instead seeking areas where she showed no interest. That's how I discovered photography. Through the viewfinder of a second-hand camera I purchased with saved allowance money, I found a world where I could control the narrative. I could decide what deserved focus, what stories needed telling. My high school journalism teacher, Mrs. Palmer, was the first adult who seemed genuinely impressed by something I created. When my photo essay on homeless teens in Boston won a regional contest, she urged me to consider journalism as a career. "You have a gift for visual storytelling, Hazel," she told me. "You find humanity in places others don't look." When I brought home the contest certificate, Dad glanced at it and asked, "Is there scholarship money attached to this?" "No," I admitted. "Well, it's nice to have hobbies," he said, turning back to his laptop. That night, I researched journalism programs across the country, determining to get as far from Boston as possible. Northwestern University in Illinois had one of the best programs, and when I was accepted with a partial merit scholarship, I was ecstatic. Dad was less impressed. "Journalism?" he scoffed when I showed him the acceptance letter. "The industry is dying, Hazel. I thought we agreed you'd apply to pre-law programs." We hadn't agreed to anything, he had decided. I had nodded to avoid conflict. After a week of tense negotiations, Dad finally agreed to pay my tuition with frequent reminders that he was investing in my education despite my impractical major choice. Every tuition payment came with passive-aggressive comments about his sacrifice and speculation about whether I'd be able to support myself after graduation. "You know, I could have put this money toward a better retirement plan," became his mantra each semester. The financial support came with invisible strings attached, a control mechanism I wouldn't fully understand until later. Whenever I showed independence or made decisions he disagreed with, the threat would surface subtly: "I sure hope you appreciate the financial sacrifices we're making for your education." The message was clear: his money meant his control. I just didn't realize how brutally he would eventually enforce that lesson. Senior year of high school should have been exciting, a time of college applications, prom plans, and preparing for independence. Instead, it became the year that permanently fractured our already strained family dynamics. I'd started dating Tyler Reynolds at the beginning of the year. He was thoughtful and creative, a guitarist in a local band who also maintained a solid GPA. For the first time, I had someone who listened when I talked about photography, who valued my opinions and made me feel seen. We'd been together for almost 6 months, and he'd become my emotional refuge from the constant tension at home. It was a rainy April afternoon when I realized I'd left my portfolio in the art classroom. I needed it for a college application supplement due the next day, so I drove back to school to retrieve it. As I cut across the student parking lot, I noticed Tyler's distinctive blue Jeep parked in the far corner. Strange, since he'd told me he had a dentist appointment that afternoon. Curious, I approached the vehicle, thinking maybe he'd loaned it to a friend. What I saw through the rain-streaked windows shattered my world: Tyler and Amber, locked in an intimate embrace. My first instinct was that I'd made a mistake. Maybe it was someone else's Jeep, someone else with dirty blonde hair like Tyler's. But then they separated, and there was no denying it was them. I stood frozen in the rain, watching as my sister laughed at something he said, her hand resting casually on his chest with the easy familiarity of someone who'd done this many times before. I knocked on the window. The startled expressions on their faces quickly transformed, Tyler's to guilt, Amber's to something more complicated, almost like satisfaction. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded once they'd rolled down the window, rain dripping from my hair onto their dry, warm laps. "Hazel, I can explain," Tyler started, but Amber interrupted. "About 3 months," she said coolly. "I didn't mean for it to happen, but we connected at that New Year's party at the Wilsons. You were busy taking photos, as usual." 3 months. While I'd been confiding in Tyler about my insecurities, sharing my dreams, giving him pieces of my heart, he'd been seeing my sister behind my back. Why, was all I could manage to ask, looking directly at Amber. Of all people, why him? She shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it burned worse than any insult. He was obviously looking for someone more mature. I tried to discourage it at first, but she trailed off, implying the attraction had been too strong to resist, as though betraying me had been some kind of romantic inevitability. That evening, still soaked and shivering, I confronted my parents. I expected outrage on my behalf, or at least basic parental concern about Amber's behavior. Instead, their response compounded the betrayal. "These teenage relationships never last anyway," Dad said dismissively. "I think you're overreacting." "But she knew he was my boyfriend," I insisted, tears streaming down my face. "She deliberately went behind my back for months. Mom at least had the decency to look uncomfortable." "It wasn't right, what they did," she acknowledged quietly. "Amber should have been more considerate of your feelings." "Considerate?" I echoed in disbelief. "She betrayed me." Dad sighed heavily, checking his watch. "Hazel, your sister is going to Yale in a few months. She deserves to have some fun before college. This boy isn't worth creating family drama over." The message couldn't have been clearer. Amber's happiness and convenience outweighed my heartbreak. My feelings were an inconvenience to the family narrative. In the weeks that followed, Amber and Tyler dated openly. I'd see them in the school hallways, at local hangouts, even at our house when she'd invite him over. Each sighting was a fresh wound. My parents encouraged me to be mature about the situation, especially when relatives or their friends were present. can't you just be civil? Mom would plead before family gatherings. It makes everyone uncomfortable when you avoid your sister. The final month of high school passed in a blur of isolation. I withdrew from social activities to avoid seeing them together. I focused obsessively on preparing for Northwestern, counting down the days until I could escape. By graduation, I'd built walls around my heart that I wasn't sure would ever come down. That summer, I barely spoke to Amber. She seemed unbothered by the rift between us, too busy preparing for Yale and enjoying her relationship with Tyler. When August finally arrived, I left for Chicago without a proper goodbye, and felt nothing but relief watching Boston disappear through the airplane window. Over the next 4 years, I returned home only when absolutely necessary, brief visits during major holidays, always carefully negotiating to minimize my time there. My relationship with my parents became increasingly distant, maintained primarily through perfunctory phone calls and obligatory updates about my classes. Amber and Tyler's relationship had ended before their respective freshman years, just another casualty of college transitions. She'd dated various prestigious suitors at Yale before settling on Garrett Huntington, a finance executive from my father's social circle. Their relationship had progressed with the same effortless success that characterized everything in Amber's life. And now, for years after the betrayal that had severed our sisterhood, I was being commanded to celebrate her perfect ending. The thick cream-colored envelope arrived at my off-campus apartment during finals week of my last semester at Northwestern. Even before opening it, I recognized the elaborate calligraphy addressing me as Miss Hazel Mitchell and the gold-embossed return address bearing my parents' information. Amber's wedding invitation was exactly as pretentious as I'd expected. I tossed it on my desk, focusing instead on completing my senior capstone project and lining up post-graduation job interviews. I had no intention of attending the wedding. For years of minimal contact had made my position clear. I'd moved on with my life without Amber in it. I planned to send a polite decline and perhaps a modest gift to maintain basic civility. 3 days later, my phone rang with my father's name flashing on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but financial anxiety won out. I was still dependent on his tuition payments for these last few months before graduation. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Hazel." His voice was tight with controlled anger, a tone I recognized from childhood. "I understand you haven't RSVP'd to your sister's wedding yet." I took a deep breath. I just got the invitation a few days ago during finals. I was planning to send my regrets. "Regrets?" he interrupted. "What do you mean regrets?" "Of course you're attending." "Dad, I have a major project due that weekend," I lied, already knowing where this conversation was heading. "And I can't really afford." "Let me be perfectly clear," he cut in again, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet register that had always made my stomach clench. "Your sister is marrying into the Huntington family. Everyone who matters in Boston will be there. I will not have to explain why my daughter is absent from this important family occasion." "Dad, Amber and I haven't had a relationship in years," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She doesn't want me there any more than I want to be there." "This isn't about what either of you wants," he snapped. "This is about family appearances. The Huntingtons are one of the most connected families in New England. Your absence would reflect poorly on all of us." When I didn't immediately respond, he delivered the ultimatum: "If you don't attend this wedding, I will not pay your final tuition installment." It's that simple. The threat hit me like a physical blow. "You'd really jeopardize my education over this?" "I'm 3 months from graduating." "That's entirely up to you," he replied coldly. "You're an adult making a choice. Actions have consequences, Hazel. That high school drama with your sister happened years ago. Grow up and be mature about it." My hands were shaking with anger. "It wasn't high school drama. She betrayed me, and you and Mom acted like it was nothing." "For God's sake," he sighed heavily into the phone. "That boy wasn't worth all this ongoing resentment. Your sister is getting married. Whatever happened between you two in the past is irrelevant now. I could hear my mother in the background asking for the phone. After some muffled discussion, she came on the line. "Hazel, honey," she began in that placating tone she always used during family conflicts. "I know things have been difficult between you and Amber, but it would mean so much to everyone if you could just come to the wedding. It's only one weekend." "Did you hear what Dad just said to me?" I asked incredulously. "He's threatening to cut off my tuition if I don't show up to play happy family." "Your father is just upset," she said weakly. "He doesn't mean it." "Yes, he does," I insisted. "And you know it." There was a long pause before she sighed. "Please, Hazel. Just come to the wedding. Don't throw away your degree over this. We can all get through one weekend together." After hanging up, I stared at my phone in disbelief. Within minutes, a text from Amber appeared. "Daddy says you have to come, so I guess I'll see you there. Don't worry, you won't be in any of the important photos." I threw my phone across the room, barely missing my roommate Jordan as she walked through the door. "Whoa. What's going on?" she asked, picking up my phone and handing it back to me. I explained the situation, growing more agitated with each detail. Jordan's expression shifted from concern to outrage. "That's emotional blackmail," she exclaimed when I finished. "They can't hold your education hostage like that." "Apparently they can," I said, pulling up my student account to review the numbers. I was looking at a $14,000 tuition balance for my final quarter. With my part-time job at the campus media lab, I had maybe $2,000 saved. There was no way I could cover the difference. "What about emergency financial aid?" Jordan suggested. "Or a last-minute loan?" I shook my head. "I've already maxed out my federal loans, and emergency aid wouldn't cover the full amount. Private loans would need a co-signer, which would have to be my parents." "You could stay with me if you needed to take a quarter off," Jordan offered. "My couch is yours if you need it." Her kindness brought tears to my eyes, but the thought of delaying graduation after coming so close was unbearable. I'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much. "I don't want to drop out with only 3 months left," I admitted. "But the thought of going to this wedding makes me physically ill." "So what are you going to do?" Jordan asked quietly. I stared at the wedding invitation still sitting on my desk, its gold lettering seeming to mock me. "I guess I'm going to a wedding." The Boston spring air felt foreign after the Chicago wind I'd grown accustomed to. As the taxi pulled up to my parents' house, I felt like a visitor arriving at a museum of my former life, familiar yet no longer belonging to me. My first order of business was finding something to wear that would satisfy my father's obsession with appearances without draining my limited savings. Jordan had offered to lend me something, but her bohemian style would only have given my father another reason to criticize me. Instead, I spent a painfully long afternoon at a consignment shop in Cambridge, eventually finding a navy blue dress that looked expensive but cost less than dinner for two at a decent restaurant. Mom greeted me at the door with an awkward hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "You look thin," she commented, her standard opening line whenever I returned home. "Have you been eating properly?" "Graduate-level journalism keeps me busy," I replied, following her into the house. Nothing had changed, same furniture, same family photos chronicling Amber's achievements with a few token images of me scattered among them. Dad emerged from his home office, giving me a quick once-over before nodding in approval. "Good, you're here. Dinner's at 7. Your sister and Garrett are coming, along with your grandparents and the Hendersons." "No hello." "No, how was your flight?" "Just instructions and expectations." Dinner that evening was excruciating. Amber arrived in designer clothes, enormous engagement ring catching the light with every gesture. Garrett Huntington matched her polished appearance, tall, conventionally handsome, with the confident demeanor of someone who's never worried about money a day in his life. "Hazel." Amber greeted me with air kisses beside both cheeks. "So glad you could make it after all." The subtle emphasis on "after all" didn't go unnoticed. I forced a smile. "Wouldn't miss it." Throughout dinner, conversation revolved around wedding details and Amber's future plans. She and Garrett had purchased a brownstone in Beacon Hill. After a 3-week honeymoon touring Europe, she would join a prestigious art gallery as their communications director. A position that had mysteriously opened up just as she expressed interest. The Huntingtons have been patrons of the gallery for generations, Garrett explained, his hand possessively covering Amber's. They were delighted to welcome Amber to the team. I nodded and took another sip of wine, catching my Aunt Kate's sympathetic glance from across the table. She'd always been more perceptive than most family members, less susceptible to Amber's carefully cultivated charm. "And what about you, Hazel?" she asked kindly. "Your mother mentioned you're graduating soon. Any plans?" Before I could answer, Dad interjected. "Hazel's still figuring things out. Journalism is a challenging field these days." His tone carried the familiar undercurrent of disapproval. "Actually," I said, straightening my shoulders, "I've had several promising interviews. There's a digital media company in Chicago that's interested in my photography portfolio." "How nice," Amber commented with a dismissive smile. "I'm sure you'll find something entry-level that works for you." The rehearsal dinner the following evening was even worse. Held at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor, it featured an open bar, 5-course meal, and about 60 guests, more than most people's actual weddings. I was seated at a table with distant cousins who kept asking why they hadn't seen me at recent family gatherings. From my corner, I observed my father working the room, moving from group to group with practiced ease. As I approached the bar for another glass of wine, I overheard him speaking to Garrett's parents. "Both my daughters have always been exceptional," he was saying, his hand resting on Amber's shoulder. "Amber at Yale and now joining the art world, and Hazel studying journalism at Northwestern. The Mitchell academic tradition continues." I nearly laughed aloud at his convenient revision of history, recalling his countless criticisms of my career choice. In that moment, I realized I was nothing more than a prop in his performance, useful only when my existence enhanced the family narrative he wished to present. Throughout the evening, Amber's bridesmaids, a collection of Yale sorority sisters and childhood friends, circled me with predatory curiosity. Their questions came wrapped in sweetness but landed like barbs. "It must be so difficult being so far from family," one commented, wine glass dangling from manicured fingers. "Especially missing all of Amber's engagement celebrations." "Northwestern's journalism program is quaint, isn't it?" another asked. My cousin looked at it but decided on Columbia instead. I smiled tightly through each interaction, counting down the hours until I could retreat to my childhood bedroom. The wedding planner, a severe woman with a clipboard permanently attached to her hand, cornered me by the dessert table. "Tomorrow's going to be magnificent," she gushed. "The flowers alone cost more than most people's entire weddings." "Is that so?" I murmured, taking another bite of chocolate mousse. "Oh yes," she continued, oblivious to my discomfort. "Mr. Mitchell has spared no expense. The final budget came in just over $200,000. The mousse turned bitter in my mouth. $200,000 for a single day of celebration, while he threatened to withhold $14,000 for my education. The disparity was so stark it left me speechless. When I finally escaped to my room that night, Mom knocked softly at my door. She entered without waiting for my response, perching awkwardly on the edge of my bed. "It's going well, don't you think?" she asked, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my comforter. "If by well you mean I haven't caused a scene, then sure," I replied, removing my earrings and placing them on the nightstand. She sighed. "Hazel, please. Just get through tomorrow. After the wedding, things can go back to normal." I turned to face her. "Normal? You mean where I'm ignored unless I'm useful for appearances? Where Dad uses money to control me? Where Amber gets everything and I get whatever's left over?" "That's not fair," she protested weakly. "Isn't it?" I challenged. "Dad's spending $200,000 on this wedding but threatened to cut off my tuition over attending it. How is that fair?" Mom's eyes widened. "How did you know how much the wedding costs?" The wedding planner mentioned it, I said. Pretty telling that's the part you're concerned about. Your father just wants what's best for both of you, she insisted. No, he wants what makes him look best, I corrected. There's a difference. She stood, straightening her blouse with trembling hands. Just get through tomorrow, Hazel. Please. For all our sakes. After she left, I lay awake staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, remnants from a childhood bedroom I'd once felt safe in. Sleep evaded me as I contemplated the choice I'd been forced to make. I'd come here to secure my future, but with every hour that passed, the cost to my self-respect grew steeper. Morning arrived with gray skies threatening rain, appropriate weather for my mood. By 9 a.m., I was corralled into a luxury hotel suite where the bridal party was assembling for hair and makeup. I sat awkwardly on a satin chaise lounge, scrolling through my phone while Amber's bridesmaids fluttered around her like attendants to royalty. Hazel, you're next for hair, the wedding planner announced, pointing to a chair where a stylist waited with an array of hot tools. I can do my own hair, I protested. Daddy paid for everyone to be professionally styled, Amber cut in, not looking up from her phone. We need to be cohesive for the photos. 45 minutes later, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. The stylist had transformed my usually straight hair into elaborate curls, pinned back on one side with a jeweled clip that matched the bridesmaids' accessories. You clean up surprisingly well, Amber commented, appearing behind me in the mirror. She was already half-dressed in her wedding gown, a custom designer creation that probably cost more than a year of my college tuition. Though you might want to let the makeup artist add a bit more coverage to those dark circles under your eyes. Before I could respond, she continued, oh, by the way, could you take some candid photos during the getting ready process? Since you're into that photography thing, might as well make yourself useful. I'm not your personal photographer, I replied evenly. Just a suggestion, she shrugged, returning to her throne-like chair where 3 attendants fussed with her veil. As we prepared to leave for the church, Dad pulled me aside in the hotel corridor, his voice low and warning, don't cause a scene or the money stops. I've kept my end of the bargain by paying for your spring quarter. Now you keep yours by being a supportive sister today. The ceremony itself was a production worthy of a royal wedding. St. Cecilia's Cathedral had been transformed with thousands of white roses and crystal decorations that caught the light from the stained glass windows. A string quartet played as hundreds of guests filed in, taking their places in the historic church. I sat in the front row beside my mother, watching as Amber glided down the aisle on our father's arm. He beamed with unmistakable pride, his usual stern expression replaced with genuine joy. I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me that way, if he ever had. The reception was held at the Boston Harbor Hotel in a ballroom overlooking the water. Ice sculptures, champagne fountains, and elaborate floral arrangements created an atmosphere of opulent celebration. I drifted around the periphery, smiling when necessary, avoiding extended conversations. Dad's speech came after dinner, once everyone was sufficiently lubricated with top-shelf alcohol. He stood at the microphone, champagne glass raised, voice thick with emotion. From the day Amber was born, we knew she was destined for greatness, he began, smiling at my sister. Her intelligence, grace, and determination have always made her mother and me incredibly proud. Now, as she begins this new chapter with Garrett, I know she'll continue to excel as she has in everything she's ever done. He continued for several minutes, chronicling Amber's achievements and attributes in loving detail. When he finally acknowledged my existence, it was brief and perfunctory, and of course, her sister Hazel is here from Chicago to celebrate this special day. That was it. My entire contribution to the family narrative reduced to geographic information. As waiters circulated with dessert, I found myself near a service corridor where voices drifted from around the corner. I recognized Amber and Dad immediately. I think it's going perfectly, Amber was saying. Everyone who matters is here. Absolutely, Dad agreed. The Huntingtons are clearly impressed. Garrett's father mentioned potentially bringing me in on their new development project. See? Aren't you glad you made Hazel come? Amber's voice had that smug quality I remembered from childhood. It would have looked weird to explain her absence. People might have started asking questions. Dad chuckled. Sometimes your sister needs a firm hand. This childish grudge of hers has gone on long enough. I know, right? Amber laughed. It's not like Tyler even mattered in the long run. She's so dramatic, holding on to high school drama after all these years. Something snapped inside me. For years of suppressed anger, resentment, and hurt crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. I stepped around the corner, facing them directly. Is that really what you think happened? I asked quietly. That I'm holding a grudge over a boy? Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances, shock rapidly transitioning to embarrassment and then defensiveness. Hazel, Dad recovered first, his voice stern. This is a private conversation. Clearly, I replied. But since you're discussing me, I think I have a right to respond. Amber rolled her eyes. Don't make a scene. It's my wedding day. I'm well aware of whose day it is. It's been made abundantly clear. I turned to my father. This was never about Tyler. This was about how you both treated me, not just then, but my entire life. That's ridiculous, he dismissed. We've given you everything. You've given Amber everything, I corrected. I got whatever was left over. $200,000 for her wedding, but you threatened my education over attending it. His face darkened. Lower your voice. People will hear you. Let them hear. I said, no longer caring about keeping my voice down. Let them know that the perfect Mitchell family is a carefully constructed lie. That you use money to control your children. That you've always had a favorite, and it's never been me. Amber's face flushed with anger. You're just jealous because I've always been more successful. It's not my fault you chose a dying profession and can barely support yourself. Success? I laughed bitterly. Your fiancé's family handed you a job. Dad paid your way through life. What exactly have you achieved on your own? That's enough. Dad's voice rose sharply. Apologize to your sister immediately. No, I said simply. I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done playing the role you've assigned me in this family. I'm done pretending that any of this is normal or healthy. Dad stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If you walk out of here, you're on your own. Completely. No more tuition, no more support, nothing. I looked between them, my father's threatening glare, my sister's satisfied smirk, and felt nothing but relief at the thought of being free from their manipulation. Goodbye, I said quietly, turning away. Hazel. My mother's voice came from behind me. She must have witnessed the confrontation. Don't do this. Please. I paused but didn't turn around. I have to, Mom. I can't do this anymore. Then you'll have to figure out how to finish school on your own, Dad called after me. Don't come crying to us when you can't pay your bills. I walked out of the ballroom, through the elegant hotel lobby, and into the cool Boston evening. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely, even knowing the financial abyss I was walking into. The flight back to Chicago the next morning was a blur. I'd spent the night in an airport hotel, paying with my nearly maxed-out credit card and wondering how I'd manage the coming weeks, let alone the remainder of my education. By Monday morning, my fears were confirmed. My father had wasted no time, my student account showed my spring quarter payment had been reversed, leaving me with a hold on my registration and a $14,000 balance due immediately. I went straight to the financial aid office, where a counselor named Ms. Patel listened sympathetically to my situation. Unfortunately, this happens more often than you might think, she said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. Parents using financial leverage as control is sadly common. What are my options? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She outlined several possibilities, none of them ideal. Federal loans were already maxed out. Private loans would require a cosigner with good credit, something I obviously couldn't get from my parents. Payment plans were available but would require a substantial down payment I didn't have. There is one other possibility, Ms. Patel said hesitantly. Northwestern has a limited number of emergency completion grants for seniors in good academic standing who experience unexpected financial hardship in their final term. They're competitive, but with your GPA and circumstances, you might qualify. I filled out the application immediately, documenting my situation as clinically as possible. The grant would cover up to $10,000, not enough for the full balance, but a significant portion. For the remaining amount, I'd need to find another solution. That afternoon, I met with Professor Martinez, my journalism faculty advisor, and explained what had happened. "This is unconscionable," she said, shaking her head. "With only 1/4 left before graduation? Let me see what I can do." Within days, she'd arranged for me to take on additional hours in the photography lab where I already worked part-time. She also connected me with a position as a library assistant in the journalism school's Media Resource Center. "Between these 2 campus jobs, you'll have enough for basic living expenses," she explained. "And I've spoken to the department head about a special departmental scholarship that might cover the remainder of your tuition gap." Jordan was equally supportive when I returned to our apartment. "My offer still stands, you can crash on my couch if you need to downsize." After calculating my expenses, I realized I couldn't afford our apartment anymore. "I might take you up on that temporarily, but I need to find something sustainable." Within a week, I'd found a room in a shared house with 4 other students. It was further from campus, smaller than my current bedroom, and had questionable plumbing, but the rent was less than half what I'd been paying. I sold everything I could spare, my television, some camera equipment I rarely used, designer clothes from my pre-college days, even my bed frame, keeping just the mattress. Each sale chipped away at the remaining tuition balance not covered by the emergency grant. Meanwhile, my phone filled with messages I couldn't bring myself to answer. Mother left tearful voicemails begging me to reconcile with my father. "He's still angry, but he'll come around if you apologize," she insisted, completely missing the point. Dad had blocked my number entirely. From mutual connections, I learned he was telling family friends I'd had a breakdown at the wedding, attributing my behavior to the stress of final exams. The narrative preserved his image while discrediting mine, a pattern I recognized from childhood. Amber's approach was more public. Her Instagram filled with posts about toxic people and choosing happiness between honeymoon photos and Santorini. She never mentioned me directly, but the timing made the target clear. Most family friends sided with my parents, understandable, given they'd only heard one version of events. A few reached out with awkward messages of support that revealed their discomfort more than any genuine understanding. Surprisingly, Aunt Kate called one evening. "I saw what happened at the wedding," she said without preamble. "It's been a long time coming." "You're probably the only one who thinks so," I replied, touched by her support. "Your father has always played favorites," she continued. "My brother has many qualities, but fairness isn't one of them." 2 days later, an envelope arrived with $2,000 in cash and a note, "For emergencies. No need to tell your father. Love, Aunt Kate." Between her gift, my new jobs, the emergency grant, and selling my possessions, I cobbled together enough to clear my tuition balance with 2 weeks to spare before the payment deadline. The weeks that followed were exhausting. I worked 60-hour weeks between my 2 campus jobs, maintained a full course load to complete my degree requirements, and still pursued internship applications for after graduation. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. My living situation was far from ideal. The shared house was noisy, with unreliable heating and roommates whose schedules rarely aligned with mine. I often found myself editing photos at 3 a.m. because it was the only quiet time available. The physical and emotional toll was significant. I lost weight, developed persistent headaches, and found myself jumping whenever my phone rang, anticipating another crisis. Jordan insisted I visit the University Counseling Center after finding me crying over a broken mug one morning, a small thing that had somehow become the embodiment of everything falling apart. "You're not okay," she said gently. "And that's completely understandable given what you're going through." The counselor helped me recognize the patterns of my family dynamics that I'd normalized over the years. "What you're describing has elements of narcissistic family structure," she explained. "The golden child/scapegoat dynamic between you and your sister is particularly textbook." Understanding the psychological framework didn't immediately heal the wounds, but it provided context that helped me process my experiences without blaming myself. As graduation approached, an unexpected opportunity emerged. Professor Martinez recommended me for an internship with a local newspaper covering neighborhood events. The pay was minimal, but it provided portfolio pieces and professional contacts. During one assignment photographing a community art installation, I met the editor of a digital publication focused on urban issues. She was impressed with my portfolio and offered me a freelance position covering local events. "We can't offer much per piece right now," she admitted, "but if your work continues at this quality, there could be a staff position opening this summer." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope for my post-graduation future. The path forward was nothing like the comfortable transition my parents had originally funded, but it was mine. Built through my own efforts and connections I'd made independently. In those difficult months, I discovered something unexpected, a network of people who valued me for myself, not as an extension of my family's reputation or a prop in someone else's narrative. Professors who recognized my talent, friends who offered genuine support, even strangers who became mentors based solely on my work. This chosen family became my foundation as I prepared to graduate without the people who had, for better or worse, shaped my first 22 years of life. Graduation day arrived with perfect May weather, sunshine warming the northwestern campus as thousands of students and families gathered for the ceremony. I'd received my cap and gown the previous week, hanging them carefully in my cramped bedroom and occasionally glancing at them in disbelief that I'd actually made it. As I prepared that morning, Jordan insisted on taking photos of me in my regalia. "Your first official graduation photo shoot," she declared, directing me through poses in the better-lit areas of our apartment. "You realize I'm the photographer between us, right?" I laughed as she frowned at her phone screen. "Exactly why you need someone else to photograph you for once," she replied, snapping another picture. Though my parents and sister were absent, I wasn't alone. Jordan and 3 other friends created a makeshift cheering section, whistling loudly when my name was called. Professor Martinez found me afterward, giving me a warm hug and introducing me to several faculty members. "This one's going places," she told them, her hand resting proudly on my shoulder. "Remember her name." That evening, my support system organized an impromptu celebration at a local restaurant. Someone had brought a small cake with "Congrats grad," written in slightly messy frosting. It was nothing like the elaborate parties my parents would have arranged, but the genuine joy in that room meant infinitely more. Professor Martinez pulled me aside before leaving. "I've recommended you to Mira Chen at Urban Lens Digital. She's looking for a junior photographer and content creator. The interview is next week." 2 weeks later, I started my first real job. The position at Urban Lens Digital offered modest pay but excellent experience, creative freedom, and colleagues who quickly became friends. My tiny desk in the open office became command central as I learned to balance photography assignments with writing responsibilities. My new apartment, a converted attic space shared with a graduate student I'd met through Jordan, was far from luxurious but provided the privacy and quiet I needed. I decorated it with thrift store finds and prints of my own photographs, creating a space that reflected my aesthetic rather than my parents' expectations. Financial independence, though challenging, brought a freedom I'd never experienced. Every bill I paid, every meal I cooked, every decision I made without consulting anyone else reinforced my capability and agency. The struggle was real. I counted pennies, maintained a meticulous budget, and occasionally ate ramen for days straight, but it was mine. 6 months after graduation, I finally felt stable enough to address the emotional aftermath of the wedding confrontation. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, using a sliding scale payment system that made sessions affordable on my entry-level salary. Dr. Freeman helped me untangle the complex web of family dynamics that had shaped my self-perception. The golden child/scapegoat pattern in narcissistic family systems creates deep-rooted belief systems in both children, she explained. Your sister was trained to believe her worth comes from achievement and approval, while you were trained to believe you're inherently less valuable. But I'm free of that now, I pointed out. Physically, yes, she agreed. But those belief systems don't disappear just because you've created distance. That's the work we need to do here. Over weekly sessions, I began recognizing how these patterns influenced my relationships, work habits, and self-talk. I learned to identify when I was seeking validation in unhealthy ways or automatically assuming others found me lacking. The first holiday season away from my family was both liberating and disorienting. Jordan invited me to join her family's Thanksgiving celebration, where I experienced a family dynamic so different from my own that it felt almost like anthropological research. Her parents disagreed openly but respectfully, siblings teased each other without malice, and accomplishments were celebrated without being weaponized against others. Christmas brought an unexpected email from my mother, her first direct communication since a series of increasingly desperate voicemails had tapered off months earlier. I miss you, she wrote simply. Would you consider talking? After discussing it with Dr. Freeman, I agreed to a phone call with clear boundaries established in advance. The conversation was awkward but civil. Mom admitted she worried about me but respected my independence. She didn't apologize for enabling Dad's behavior over the years, but she didn't defend it either, progress, of sorts. Your father still believes you owe him an apology, she mentioned tentatively. I don't, I replied firmly. And I'm not interested in a relationship that's conditional on me accepting mistreatment. By spring, we'd established a cautious pattern of occasional texts and monthly phone calls, always just between us, with the understanding that she wouldn't relay information to my father unless I explicitly agreed. Amber's perfect marriage began showing cracks on social media around the same time. Her carefully curated posts became less frequent, and mutual acquaintances mentioned rumors of tension between her and Garrett. I felt no satisfaction in her apparent unhappiness. Therapy had helped me recognize that she too was a product of our dysfunctional family system, just playing a different assigned role. The professional success I'd worked so hard for began materializing in unexpected ways. A photo essay I created about Chicago's disappearing neighborhood institutions went viral locally, leading to my first major byline and a featured portfolio on Urban Lens website. 2 days after it published, I received my first communication from my father in nearly a year, a terse email saying only, "Saw your photo essay. Good work." No apology, no acknowledgement of everything that had happened, just a brief nod to my professional achievement now that it was publicly recognized. The old me would have grasped at this crumb of approval. The new me recognized it for what it was, an attempt to reassert connection on his terms, only when I'd proven worthy of his attention. I didn't respond. As the 1-year anniversary of the wedding confrontation approached, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. I'd gone from financial dependency to self-sufficiency, from seeking external validation to building internal worth, from avoiding conflict to establishing healthy boundaries. The path hadn't been easy. There were still nights I woke up anxious about money, days I doubted my career choice, moments I longed for the security of family acceptance, however conditional it had been. But these episodes became less frequent as I built a life aligned with my own values rather than someone else's expectations. When my mother tentatively suggested a family dinner during my upcoming business trip to Boston, I considered it carefully before setting my conditions: a public restaurant, limited to a 2-hour meeting, with the understanding that I would leave immediately if anyone became manipulative or disrespectful. I've forgiven all of you, I explained to her, but forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same patterns to continue. I can have compassion for everyone's perspective without subjecting myself to harmful dynamics. Whether that meeting would lead to reconciliation or reinforce my decision to maintain distance remained to be seen. Either way, I knew I could handle it from a position of strength rather than dependence. The journey from ultimatum to freedom had cost me financial security, family connection, and countless nights of sleep, but it had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I could survive losing everything I thought I needed and still build a meaningful life on my own terms. So here's my question for you: have you ever had to choose between your dignity and something that seemed essential? What did you choose, and how did it change you? Let me know in the comments below. If you found value in my story, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content about navigating complex family dynamics and finding your own path. Remember that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor your worth in every relationship.